Imagine walking onto a battlefield where the enemy is, just twice your size, twice as strong, and incredibly aggressive.
Right.
Your strategy isn't to fight them head on. It's not to outmuscle them or, build better armor.
Oh, that would be suicide.
Exactly.
Hmm.
Instead, your strategy is to play this intricate, relentless game of keep away for 90 agonizing minutes. You just starve them of the one resource they need until they completely collapse from mental and physical exhaustion.
It completely defies our basic intuition about conflict. We are hardwired to believe that sheer size and brute force will always dictate the outcome.
Right. But between 2008 and 2012, the machine that conquered the global sport of football, or soccer, wasn't built on size at all. It was built by some of the smallest players on the pitch. And they relied entirely on geometry.
Yeah, it's a fascinating shift.
Today, we're exploring a really comprehensive Wikipedia article detailing the history, the tactics, and the massive cultural impact of a phenomenon known as Tikitaka.
And our mission for this deep dive is clear, because this isn't just a sports breakdown for the diehard fan.
No, definitely not. We are looking at how a very specific style of short passing football disrupted an entire global industry. It sparked a philosophical civil war within the sport and, fundamentally changed how we view space, strategy, and innovation.
Yeah, Tikitaka is basically a masterclass in how a meticulously executed idea can just completely dismantle the established order.
Right.
What this deep dive reveals is that Tikitaka isn't simply about what you do with the ball when you have it.
Yeah.
That is purely the surface aesthetic.
It looks pretty, but there's more to it.
Exactly. The engine driving the entire philosophy is a relentless, calculated manipulation of space. It's about manufacturing advantages out of thin air.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because before we can really understand how this mathematical obsession conquered the globe, we have to look at the physical environment that allowed it to thrive in the first place.
We have to look at the DNA.
Yeah, the source material traces the DNA of this style way back. We're talking about the 1930s with something called the Schockerkreisel, which means the shock spinning top.
Right, a system that won Schalke 04, 6 German championships, just by focusing on rapid ground passing.
And that eventually evolved into the 1970s with the Dutch Total Football of Ajax and the Netherlands, which was then brought to Barcelona by the legendary Johan Cruyff.
Yeah, Total Football introduces really foundational concept of positional interchange. It's the idea that players aren't just fixed to one spot on the field.
Like foosball players stuck on a rod.
Exactly. They can move, and possessing the ball is the ultimate tool for controlling the tempo of the game. That philosophy took deep root at Barcelona's youth academy, La Masia.
Which is crucial, right? Because instead of looking for giants, La Masia spent decades developing these highly technical, physically diminutive players.
Guys like Lionel Messi, Xavi, and Andres Iniesta, they cultivated extraordinary touch, unparalleled vision, and this crazy resistance to panic under intense pressure.
And the label for this style, Tikitaka, it sounds almost musical, which is fitting for how it actually looked on the pitch.
It is very catchy.
It was popularized during the 2006 World Cup by a Spanish broadcaster named Andres Montes. He was watching Spain's elegant passing against Tunisia and just started saying on air, estamos tocando tikitaka, which means we are playing tikitaka.
But the text notes a really fantastic irony here. The term might have actually originated earlier as an insult.
Wait, really? An insult?
Yeah, Coach Javier Clemente supposedly used it to mock the style. He thought it was just pointless, superficial tapping of the ball.
Wow. An insult that eventually defined an entire era of the sport. But the real tipping point arrives in 2008 when Pep Guardiola takes over as manager of Barcelona.
Right. He inherits this golden La Masia generation. And he takes those total football principles to an absolute extreme.
He subordinates every single action on the pitch to the pass. And the results speak for themselves. Between 2008 and 2012, Barcelona wins an astonishing 14 titles under his guidance.
It was unprecedented. And to achieve that, Guardiola implemented tactics that seemed completely counterintuitive at first glance.
Like what?
Well, for example, he forced the goalkeeper to stop booming the ball down the field. That was the standard safety protocol for decades. If you're in trouble, kick it long.
Right, just get it away from the goal.
Exactly. But he required the keeper to act like an outfield player, literally starting the short passing sequences from inside their own penalty area.
Which sounds incredibly risky.
Highly risky. And he also utilized something called a false nine.
Okay, let's explain that for the listener. Traditionally, a number 9 is your big, strong center forward, right? The guy who stands right on top of the opponent's defense, acting as a physical battering ram.
Right, the target man.
But the false nine does the exact opposite. They drop deep into the midfield.
This is a perfect example of how Tikitaka creates physical advantages through spatial manipulation. When that center forward, often Lionel Messi, drops deep into the midfield, the opposing center backs face a lose-lose mechanical dilemma.
It's a trap.
It is. If a defender steps out of their defensive line to follow Messi, they leave a massive gaping hole behind them, and Barcelona's wingers will just sprint right into it.
But if the defender stays put in their line, they give the most dangerous player in the world, acres of free space to turn, face the goal, and run right at them with the ball. It essentially weaponizes the defender's own positioning against them. It's brilliant.
It really is. And to ensure that spacing was always perfect, Guardiola instituted a concept called positional play.
I read about this. He literally painted lines on the training pitch to divide it into specific zones, didn't he?
He did. The strict rule was that no more than 2 players could occupy the same vertical line, and no more than 3 could occupy the same horizontal line.
Visually, it reminds me of a highly choreographed ballet, where dancers are strictly confined to specific floor tiles to ensure the visual spacing is always totally flawless.
The ballet analogy captures the aesthetic, for sure, but mechanically, it functions much more like a ruthless game of chess.
Oh.
Well, the goal of that strict grid isn't just to look pretty, it's to guarantee the player with the ball always has at least 2 passing options, forming triangles all over the pitch.
Right, the famous triangles.
Exactly. By maintaining that rigid grid, you can slowly shift your players to overload one side of the field. You basically draw the entire opposing team over to defend you.
And once they commit to that side,
you exploit the mathematical advantage by rapidly switching the ball to the other side, which you've intentionally left completely empty.
That grid requires an immense amount of playable space to work effectively, though, which leads to a really crucial detail in the source material, a 2005 update to the offside rule.
Yes. This is vital.
For anyone listening who isn't deeply steeped in sports rules, the offside law basically prevents attackers from cherry-picking behind the defense. The defenders act as an invisible line. If you are behind them when the ball is passed, you are penalized.
Right.
So how did this specific rule change in 2005 alter the physical landscape of the sport?
What's fascinating here is that administrative rule changes often dictate the physical evolution of the athletes themselves. Prior to 2005, defenders could confidently step forward to catch attackers offside, even if those attackers weren't directly involved in the play.
They could just step up and neutralize the threat.
Right. But the 2005 update softened this. Attackers could now linger in dangerous areas as long as they didn't touch the ball immediately.
Oh, wow. That must have terrified defenders.
It absolutely terrified them. Fearing they would get beaten by a sudden sprint from deep, defensive lines began dropping much deeper toward their own goal just to protect themselves.
And when the defensive wall moves backward, the entire playing area stretches out. The space between the midfield and the defense suddenly expands.
Exactly. And in a compressed space, a 200-pound physical enforcer will dominate a smaller player through sheer brute force.
Because there's nowhere to hide.
Right. But in an expanded space, brute force becomes entirely useless. The currency of the sport shifted almost overnight.
So agility, spatial awareness, and the technical skill to thread a pass through a tight angle became far more valuable than just raw muscle.
Yes, the environment shifted to favor the exact type of player La Masia had been quietly engineering for a decade. Guardiola's geometric grid was specifically designed to exploit that newly created space.
That theory quickly jumped from club football to the international stage, too. The Spain national team adopted the style under Luis Aragonés and later Vicente del Bosque.
And their catalyst was actually a pretty harsh reality check in 2006.
Yeah, the text explicitly notes that Spain looked at the international landscape and realized they simply weren't physically tough enough to outmuscle teams like Germany or Italy.
They couldn't win a fist fight, so to speak.
Exactly. So they embraced a radical solution. They decided, if we cannot fight you for the ball, we will simply ensure you never get to touch it.
They completely monopolized the core resource of the game, and it resulted in a historic dynasty. They won the 2008 European Championship, the 2010 World Cup, and Euro 2012 consecutively.
But here's where it gets really interesting. Tikitaka is celebrated globally for its attacking flair. I mean, the highlights are all dizzying, beautiful passing sequences.
Yeah, they look amazing on YouTube.
Right. But the text describes the system as defensive and offensive in equal measure. And looking at the raw data from Spain's Euro 2012 run, I honestly struggle to see the offensive intent.
What do the numbers say?
Well, they averaged 63% possession, and they averaged 58 passes per shot. If you are holding the ball for almost two-thirds of the match and completing 50-plus passes before you even attempt to score, aren't you essentially just killing the clock from the opening whistle?
It sounds like it, yeah.
How is this not just an incredibly conservative defensive strategy that's simply disguised by pre-passing?
Because it is an incredibly conservative defensive strategy. That is the grand paradox of Tikitaka.
Really? So it was a defense mechanism all along?
Yes. The underlying mechanism is flawlessly pragmatic. If we have the ball, the opponent mathematically cannot score, period. Analysts like Sid Lowe highlight this perfectly when discussing Spain's Euro 2008 victory. Aragonese didn't implement tiki-taka to play beautiful evangelical football. He knew his defensive players were physically vulnerable.
So he hid them.
Exactly. He used endless possession as a shield to protect them. It is defense through deprivation. You don't need to make aggressive, risky tackles if the opponent is endlessly chasing shadows.
It's the ultimate preemptive strike. But historically, whenever a highly pragmatic, innovative strategy starts winning everything, a dangerous shift occurs.
It always does.
It stops being a tool and becomes a rigid dogma. The source details a massive philosophical backlash as the years went on, both from opponents and from within the system itself.
Yeah, the initial awe definitely faded, and the cracks in the foundation became visible. Opposing managers began calling it out pretty aggressively.
Jose Mourinho famously dismissed Spain's technique as sterile.
And Arsène Wenger observed a distinct shift in intent, noting that while Spain originally used possession to orchestrate attacks, by 2012, they were playing, as he put it, first and foremost, a way not to lose.
But the most damning critique came from inside the house. Gerard Piqué, who was a foundational defender for both Barcelona and Spain, confessed in 2013 that their play had become utterly predictable.
He used a very specific phrase, didn't he?
He did. He said they found themselves slaves to that system.
Wow. When a core architect admits to being a slave to the design, the ideology has officially consumed the utility.
It reminds me of a tech company that falls so deeply in love with its own algorithm that it completely loses touch with reality.
That's a great analogy.
Like the engineers spend all their time tweaking the code to be theoretically, mathematically perfect, but they completely forget they're supposed to be making a product people actually want to use.
Right. They obsess over the metric, in this case possession statistics, and forget the objective, which is scoring goals.
Exactly. Even Pep Guardiola eventually snapped. He came out and said he loathed the tiki-taka label, calling possession for the sake of possession rubbish.
He had to remind people that the actual intent of the grid was to destabilize the opponent, not just to pass in an endless comfortable circle.
Because it got boring.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the backlash wasn't just tactical, it was deeply cultural. The aesthetic obsession replaced practical effectiveness, giving rise to this horrific mutation the media dubbed Tiki-Takanaccio.
Tiki-Takanaccio, that's a mouthful. What is that?
It blended the endless passing of tiki-taka with the famously negative, ultra-defensive Italian catenaccio style.
Oh, that sounds awful.
It became agonizing to watch. It was a slow, directionless extreme where teams would endlessly recycle the ball without ever threatening the opponent's goal.
And Italian football legends like Giorgio Chiellini and Gianluigi Buffon were incredibly vocal about the damage this dogma inflicted on the sport.
They really were.
Chiellini argued that this obsession, which he called guardiolismo, effectively ruined an entire generation of Italian defenders.
Because in the pursuit of developing defenders who could hit beautiful 40-yard diagonal passes, academies stopped teaching them the gritty mechanics of actually marking an attacker or winning a header.
And Buffon observed the exact same erosion in goalkeepers, right?
Yes. He voiced intense frustration that scouts were suddenly judging young keepers more on their footwork and passing completion rates than on their fundamental ability to stop a shot from going into the net.
Which is their entire job.
Exactly. When the ideological system overrides the primary fundamental function of a role, structural collapse is imminent.
And that structural collapse is exactly what followed. Because once the vulnerabilities were exposed philosophically, the rest of the world figured out the mechanical blueprint to dismantle the machine tactically.
It was only a matter of time.
The source chronicles a fascinating evolution of how opponents finally broke tiki-taka.
It began with a strategy of radical containment. Teams like Chelsea and Inter Milan realized between 2009 and 2012 that engaging tiki-taka on its own terms was tactical suicide.
Right, you can't outpass them.
Exactly. If you try to aggressively press Barcelona and steal the ball, you will simply tire yourself out while they ping it around you. So they refused the bait. They packed the defense. Chelsea's Fernando Torres explicitly stated their strategy wasn't about stealing the ball. It was about concentrating entirely on space.
Which is brilliant when you think about it.
They lined up on the edge of their own penalty box and essentially told Barcelona, go ahead, pass it 800 times side to side in front of us, but we are mathematically eliminating the space you need to enter the penalty box.
And containment works, but it requires grueling, flawless concentration. One slip up and you're done.
So how did it evolve?
Well, the evolution from passive containment to active destruction arrived courtesy of Bayern Munich in the 2012-2013 Champions League semifinals. They obliterated Barcelona 4-0 and 3-0 for a staggering 7-0 aggregate scoreline.
7-0. That's a massacre. How did they do it?
Bayern used a technique called fake pressing.
Fake pressing. Yeah. Instead of committing to a tackle and getting bypassed by a quick pass, a Bayern player would sprint close to the Barcelona player with the ball, forcing them to turn backward or sideways, but stopping just short of a full challenge.
Oh, I see. They shepherded Barcelona away from danger while conserving their own physical energy.
Exactly. And then Bayern ruthlessly exploited the physical reality of the La Masia generation. Because Tikitaka was built on small, agile players, Bayern realized they had a massive height advantage.
Ah, so brute force makes a comeback.
It does. They started bombing crosses into the box and utilizing corner kicks to physically bully Barcelona in the air.
So Bayern surgically targeted the inherent physical weakness of the system without falling into the trap of chasing the ball.
Right. But the definitive public execution of Tikitaka, the moment the world saw the machine fully decoded, happened at the 2014 World Cup when the Netherlands faced Spain.
Right. The Dutch manager, Louis van Gaal, deployed a 5-3-2 formation. He absorbed Spain's endless passing, and the moment his team won the ball, they bypassed the midfield entirely, launching these swift, devastating counterattacks.
And the result was brutal.
The Netherlands crushed Spain 5-1. It was Spain's worst defeat in 64 years.
The mechanics of that 5-3-2 formation are the ultimate antidote to the mathematical grid we discussed earlier.
How does it break the grid?
Well, by playing with 3 central defenders, Van Gaal completely nullified the false 9. One center back could step forward to challenge the false 9, while the other 2 remained perfectly positioned to cover any of those gaping holes we talked about.
So the trap doesn't work anymore.
Exactly. Meanwhile, the wingbacks pushed wide to suffocate Spain's wide players. The grid was completely smothered.
So what does this all mean? The dramatic irony of that 2014 match is staggering. Louis van Gaal was the manager of Barcelona in the late 90s and early 2000s.
Yeah, he was there.
He was one of the early architects who helped cultivate the La Masia generation. He mentored Xavi and Iniesta. He helped construct the very machine that he publicly dismantled on the world stage a decade later.
It's poetic, really.
It forces us to ask, was Tiki-Taka defeated by superior counter-tactics, or did it defeat itself through its own stubborn predictability?
This raises an important question. And the reality is that the two are inextricably linked. When your entire philosophy relies on an incredibly strict, unyielding geometric grid, you are literally handing your opponents a map.
Here's exactly what we are going to do.
Right. A team like Bayern Munich or the Netherlands eventually knows exactly where every player is going to be. The system's greatest strength, its structural rigidity and devotion to the pass, became the exact blueprint opponents used to bypass it.
They proved that directness, vertical speed, and raw physicality could shatter endless possession, provided it was applied with calculated precision rather than blind aggression. It is a stunning, complete narrative arc. An idea born out of physical necessity evolves into an unstoppable global conqueror, calcifies into a rigid dogma, and ultimately becomes a predictable vulnerability torn apart by the rest of the world.
It's the life cycle of almost every major innovation.
And the reason we are doing a deep dive on this today is because the tactical rise and fall of Tiki-Taka applies far beyond the confines of a football pitch. It applies directly to you, the listener.
Because the mechanics of innovation and stagnation are universal.
Whether you are running a business, managing a complex team, or relying on a personal workflow, your greatest strength, if overused and unquestioned, inevitably becomes your most predictable weakness.
Absolutely.
If you assume your algorithm, your method, your personal tiki-taka is completely infallible, you stop adapting. You become a slave to your own system.
You start tweaking the code just to tweak the code.
The moment you prioritize the beauty of your process over the tangible results of your product, you are leaving yourself exposed. You have to continually adapt and be willing to abandon your dogma before the rest of the world figures out the blueprint to counter you.
Which leaves us with a final thought to explore on your own. If a system as dominant, mathematically brilliant, and deeply ingrained as Tikitaka could be completely decoded and dismantled in less than a decade, what unbeatable systems operating in our world right now, whether in global technology monopolies, modern business models, or broader cultural trends, are secretly just one tactical shift away from total collapse?
We started by talking about the perfect machine, but as the rise and fall of Tiki-Taka proved, no matter how flawlessly you paint the lines on the floor, eventually someone is going to figure out how to dance to a different song.